The autumn evening had turned the city streets into a painting of amber and gold. Streetlights cast their warm glow on wet pavement, reflecting the colors of fallen leaves that lined the sidewalks. There was something peaceful about this time of year, when the air turned crisp and the world seemed to slow down just a little. Thomas Brennan walked hand in hand with his daughter through the quiet neighborhood, their footsteps creating a gentle rhythm on the damp sidewalk. He was a man in his late 30s, dressed in a navy blue suit that spoke of long days at the office. His dark hair was neatly combed back, and though his expression carried the weight of responsibility, there was a softness in his eyes when he looked down at the small hand in his. Little Aria, just 4 years old, wore a pink knit cardigan over her white dress, with a matching pink beanie covering her curly blonde hair. She chattered away about her day at preschool, telling him about the pictures she'd painted and the songs she'd learned. Thomas listened with the patience of a father who knew these moments were precious, who understood that childhood passed far too quickly. Their car was parked just down the street, a sleek dark sedan that waited patiently under the glow of the street lamps. They'd spent the evening at Aria's dance class, one of their weekly rituals that Thomas never missed, no matter how demanding his work became. As they approached the car, Aria suddenly stopped walking. Her small hand tugged at her father's, and she pointed toward a bench beneath one of the ornate streetlights. "Daddy," she said, in that innocent voice that could break a heart with its purity. "Why is she sleeping on the bench?" Thomas followed his daughter's gaze and felt something tighten in his chest. There, curled up on the wooden bench, was a young woman. She looked to be in her early 20s, with light brown hair that fell across her face. She wore a thin beige dress that offered little protection against the autumn chill, and she clutched a small white bundle close to her chest. Even from a distance, Thomas could see she was shivering, but it was the bundle that made him pause. As he looked closer, he realized with a jolt that it wasn't just a bundle of cloth. It was a baby. The woman was holding an infant, wrapped in what looked like a worn blanket, and both of them were sleeping on that cold bench as the evening grew darker and colder. "She must be very tired, sweetheart," Thomas said softly, but his mind was already racing. No one slept on a bench like that by choice, especially not with a baby. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. Aria looked up at her father with those wide, questioning eyes that children have, the ones that still see the world as a place where everything should make sense, where everyone should be safe and warm. "Is she okay, Daddy? Is the baby okay?" Thomas knelt down beside his daughter, bringing himself to her level. "I don't know, honey, but I think we should find out. Would that be okay with you?" Aria nodded seriously as if she understood the importance of this moment. Thomas stood and approached the bench slowly, not wanting to startle the young woman. As he drew closer, he could see more details that troubled him deeply. Her clothes were dirty and damp from the earlier rain. Her shoes were worn through at the soles. The baby's blanket, though wrapped carefully around the infant, was threadbare and patched. "Excuse me," Thomas said gently. "Miss, are you all right?" The young woman stirred, her eyes fluttering open. For a moment she looked confused, disoriented. Then, as she realized where she was and that a stranger was standing before her, fear flashed across her face. She sat up quickly, clutching the baby tighter to her chest, her body tensing as if preparing to run. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, her voice rough with exhaustion. "I'm sorry. I'll move. I didn't mean to. I'll go somewhere else." "No, please," Thomas said, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not asking you to leave. I'm just concerned. It's getting cold and you have a baby. Do you have somewhere to go?" The woman's eyes filled with tears and she looked away, ashamed. "We're fine. We'll be fine." But they clearly weren't fine. Thomas could see that. He could see it in the way she trembled, in the dark circles under her eyes, in the desperate way she held her child. Aria stepped forward then, her small voice cutting through the tension. "Are you sad?" she asked the woman. "When I'm sad, my daddy makes me hot chocolate. Do you want some hot chocolate?" The simple kindness of a child's words seemed to break something in the young woman. A sob escaped her throat and she covered her mouth with one hand, trying to hold back the tears. Thomas made a decision. It was the kind of decision that some might question, that carried risks, that defied the careful boundaries people build around their lives. But it was also the only decision his heart would allow him to make. "My name is Thomas Brennan," he said quietly. This is my daughter, Aria. We live not far from here. I'd like to offer you a warm place to stay tonight. A hot meal, a safe place for you and your baby to sleep. No strings attached. No questions that you don't want to answer, just warmth and safety for one night. The woman stared at him as if he'd spoken a foreign language. Why would you do that? You don't know me. I could be anyone. You're a mother protecting her child, Thomas said simply. That's all I need to know. The rest we can figure out tomorrow, but tonight it's going to get down near freezing. And neither you nor your baby should be out here in that. The woman looked down at her infant, and Thomas saw the war playing out on her face. Pride versus necessity. Distrust versus desperation. Fear versus hope. My name is Kelly, she finally whispered. Kelly Morrison. And this is Lily. She's 2 months old. It's nice to meet you, Kelly. Will you let us help you? Kelly nodded, unable to speak, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. Thomas gently helped her to her feet, noting how weak she seemed, how she swayed slightly, as if she hadn't eaten in days. Aria reached up and took Kelly's free hand, the one not holding baby Lily, and squeezed it reassuringly. It's okay, the little girl said with absolute certainty. My daddy helps people. That's what he does. They walked the short distance to Thomas's car. He opened the back door and helped Kelly settle in, making sure both she and the baby were comfortable. Aria climbed in beside them, chattering away about how their house had a guest room with a really soft bed and how Mrs. Chen, their housekeeper, made the best soup in the whole world. As Thomas drove through the lamp-lit streets toward his home, he glanced in the rearview mirror. Kelly had her eyes closed, leaning back against the seat, but her arms remained protectively around her baby. Aria was still talking, her small voice filling the car with innocent warmth. Thomas thought about his own journey to this moment. He'd built a successful company from the ground up, becoming CEO before he was 35. He had money, influence, a beautiful home. But he'd also lost his wife to cancer 3 years ago, and he'd learned the hard way that success meant nothing if you didn't have someone to share it with, if you didn't use it to make the world a little bit better. His wife, Catherine, had been the kindest person he'd ever known. She'd volunteered at homeless shelters, donated to causes that helped struggling families, and always reminded Thomas that their blessings came with responsibilities. Before she died, she'd made him promise to teach Aria the same values, to show her that kindness was more important than wealth. We're here, Thomas said softly as he pulled into the driveway of a comfortable 2-story home. It wasn't ostentatious, though he could have afforded much more. Catherine had wanted a home, not a mansion, and he'd honored that wish. Inside, the house was warm and welcoming. Mrs. Chen, who helped with Aria and kept the house running while Thomas worked long hours, was just finishing up for the evening. She took one look at Kelly and the baby and, without missing a beat, sprang into action. You poor dear, she said, guiding Kelly to the living room couch. Sit. I'll make some tea and heat up soup. And the baby needs feeding, yes? I'll get some bottles ready. Kelly looked overwhelmed. I don't have formula. I've been nursing, but I haven't been eating enough. And my milk isn't... Shh, Mrs. Chen said gently. We'll get you fed and then you'll be able to feed her. It's going to be all right. Thomas showed Kelly to the guest room upstairs, where Mrs. Chen had already laid out fresh towels and turned down the bed. There's a bathroom right here, he said, pointing to the adjacent door. Take a hot shower if you'd like. I'll have Mrs. Chen bring up some clothes that might fit you. They belong to my wife. She passed away a few years ago, but I think she'd be happy knowing they were helping someone. Kelly's eyes welled up again. I don't understand why you're doing this. Why you're being so kind to a complete stranger. Thomas was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. When my wife was sick, when we were going through the worst time of our lives, people showed us unexpected kindness. Neighbors brought meals. Friends drove Aria to school when I couldn't. Strangers at the hospital offered words of comfort. I learned that kindness isn't something you earn. It's something you need and something you give. Because we're all just human beings trying to make it through this complicated life. He paused, then added, and because my daughter asked why you were sleeping on that bench, and I didn't have a good answer. The only answer I have is that sometimes the world is hard, and sometimes people fall through the cracks, and sometimes all it takes is one person to reach out a hand and help pull someone back up. Kelly covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Thomas quietly excused himself, giving her privacy to process everything that was happening. Downstairs, Arya was helping Mrs. Chen set the table, placing napkins next to each plate with careful precision. When she saw her father, she ran to him and wrapped her small arms around his legs. "Daddy, did we do a good thing?" Thomas picked her up, holding her close. "Yes, sweetheart. We did a very good thing. Like Mommy used to do?" "Exactly like Mommy used to do." Arya smiled, satisfied, and wiggled to be put down so she could continue helping Mrs. Chen. An hour later, they all sat around the kitchen table. Kelly had showered and changed into some of Catherine's clothes, a simple sweater and comfortable pants. She looked younger now, cleaned up and warm, probably no more than 22 or 23. Baby Lily slept peacefully in a bassinet that Mrs. Chen had retrieved from the attic, one that Arya had used as an infant. Kelly ate slowly at first, as if she couldn't quite believe the food was real. Then, as her hunger caught up with her, she ate more eagerly, finishing 2 bowls of Mrs. Chen's homemade soup and 3 slices of bread. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I can't remember the last time I had a hot meal." "You don't have to thank us," Thomas said gently. "But if you want to talk about what happened, what brought you to that bench tonight, we're here to listen. No judgment, just if we can help more than just a warm bed and a meal, I'd like to try." Kelly was quiet for a long moment, staring at her empty bowl. Then slowly she began to talk. She'd grown up in foster care, never adopted, aging out of the system at 18 with nowhere to go and no support. She'd worked minimum wage jobs trying to scrape by, living in a tiny apartment with 3 roommates. Then she'd gotten pregnant. The father had disappeared the moment he found out. Her roommates had kicked her out because they didn't want a baby in the apartment. She'd tried to work as long as she could. But when Lily came and there was no maternity leave, no savings and no family to help, everything had fallen apart. She'd lost her job, lost her apartment, and ended up on the streets with a newborn baby. "I've been trying to get to a shelter," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But they're all full. There's a waiting list. They told me maybe 2 or 3 weeks before a bed opens up. I've been sleeping wherever I can find a place that's semi-safe. But tonight I was just so tired, so cold, and I sat down on that bench just to rest for a minute, and I guess I fell asleep." She looked up at Thomas, tears streaming down her face. "I'm a terrible mother." "What kind of mother ends up homeless with a 2-month-old baby?" "A mother who's doing the best she can in impossible circumstances," Thomas said firmly. "A mother who kept her baby safe and warm even when she herself was cold and hungry. That's not a terrible mother. Kelly, that's a mother who loves her child enough to keep fighting." Arya, who'd been listening quietly while coloring at the table, looked up. "My mommy died," she said matter-of-factly. "But before she died, she told me that love is the most important thing. And you love your baby, so you're a good mommy." Kelly laughed and cried at the same time, reaching over to squeeze Arya's small hand. "Thank you, sweetheart. That's very kind of you to say." Over the next hour, as Arya played with her toys in the corner and baby Lily slept peacefully, Thomas and Kelly talked about practical matters. He learned that she had no ID, no social security card, no birth certificate for Lily. Everything had been lost or stolen during her time on the streets. She had no bank account, no way to get a job, no way to access the social services that might help her. But Thomas was a problem solver. It's what made him successful in business. And now he turned that same energy towards solving Kelly's problems. "Tomorrow," he said, "we'll go to the social services office and start getting your documents replaced. I have a lawyer who can help expedite things. We'll get Lily's birth certificate, get her set up with a pediatrician for a checkup. We'll register you for assistance programs, food stamps, WIC, anything you're eligible for." Kelly shook her head in disbelief. "Why would you do all that? This is already more than I could have ever asked for." "Because it's the right thing to do," Thomas said simply. "Because you deserve help. Because Lily deserves a stable home. And because I have the resources and the ability to help, which means I have the responsibility to do it." He paused, then continued. "I have a rental property. A small apartment above a garage on a property I own across town. It's furnished, utilities included. It's empty right now. You and Lily could stay there while you get back on your feet. No rent for the first 6 months. After that, We can talk about a reasonable amount based on what you're able to afford. Kelly stared at him, speechless. And, Thomas continued, my company is always looking for good people. We have positions in our office that don't require college degrees. Administrative work, filing, data entry. It's not glamorous, but it pays a living wage with benefits. I can arrange for on-site childcare for Lily. You'd have to prove yourself. Work hard, show up on time. But if you're willing to do that, the job is yours. I don't understand, Kelly whispered. People don't do things like this. They just don't. Some people do, Thomas said gently. Maybe not enough people. But some of us try. Mrs. Chen, who'd been quietly cleaning up the kitchen, came over and put a hand on Kelly's shoulder. When my husband died 20 years ago, I had nothing. Mr. Thomas's wife. She helped me get back on my feet. Gave me a job, helped me get my work visa, treated me like family. That's who they are. That's what they do. Kelly broke down then, sobbing into her hands. All the fear and stress and exhaustion of the past months pouring out of her. Thomas and Mrs. Chen sat with her, letting her cry, offering quiet comfort and tissues and the simple presence of people who cared. Eventually, Kelly composed herself. She looked at Thomas with red-rimmed eyes. I'll work hard. I promise. I'll prove I'm worth this chance. I won't let you down. I know you won't, Thomas said. But Kelly, you don't have to prove anything to earn basic human decency. You're worth it just because you're a person, a mother, someone who needs help. That's enough. That night, Kelly and Lily slept in the guest room, in a soft bed with clean sheets and warm blankets. Downstairs, Thomas sat in his study, thinking about the day's events. Arya came padding in wearing her pajamas, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. Daddy, I'm glad we helped the lady and the baby. Thomas pulled his daughter onto his lap. Me too, sweetheart. Is that what Mommy meant when she said we should be kind to people? That's exactly what she meant. Arya was quiet for a moment, then said, I think Mommy would be proud of us. Thomas felt his eyes sting with tears. I think you're right, Arya. I think she would be very proud. He carried his daughter up to bed, tucked her in, and kissed her forehead. As he turned off her light and stood in the doorway, he thought about all the decisions he'd made that day. The choice to stop, to ask if someone needed help, to open his home and his resources to a stranger. Some people might say he was foolish, taking risks, being too trusting. But Thomas knew different. He knew that compassion wasn't weakness. Kindness wasn't foolishness. And sometimes, the best thing a person could do with their success was use it to lift someone else up. He thought about Catherine, about the values she'd held dear, about the example she'd wanted to set for their daughter, and he knew that today, he'd honored her memory in the best possible way. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new problems to solve, new obstacles to overcome. But tonight, a young mother and her baby were sleeping safely and warmly under his roof. Tonight, his daughter had learned a valuable lesson about compassion. Tonight, he'd used his blessings to bless someone else. And that, Thomas thought as he finally headed to his own bed, was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. Because in the end, life wasn't measured by wealth or status or success. It was measured by the kindness we showed to those who needed it most. By the bridges we built instead of the walls. By the hands we extended instead of the doors we closed. And on this autumn night, in a house filled with warmth and hope, that's exactly what had happened. One question from a child, one woman sleeping on a bench, one decision to help. Sometimes that's all it takes to change a life, or maybe to change two lives, or perhaps to remind ourselves what it truly means to be human,